I do want to mention that when Dan is done, when you come up, just be careful. He's got to clean this up. All this has to go back in his truck. So if we have some big, strong people.
Okay.
All right. So tonight we have Dan Henry is going to be doing a demo with his ornamental lathe. Dan Henry has been a member of our club for many, many, many years.
A long time.
And a member of the Hunt County Club. The first one I remember a few years ago, you actually made your own lathe.
Yes, I did.
Is this one you made? Or one
No,
you
this was made by Martin Strand. Belongs to Sammy Thompson. Sammy allowed me to borrow it for this demonstration because it's portable.
So this is a home built lathe, and you can buy one or get one, make one.
However you want to do it.
However you want to do it. But we're going to let Dan talk about it, and he knows this much better than I do.
Okay.
Dan, take it away.
All right. I've been turning since '95, I believe was the first time I turned a pin, and I turned pins for a while because that's all I know how to do. And then occasionally things come along. In '07, there was an article in the AAW Journal about this lathe made out of MDF wrote by John McGill. There was two articles, one how to build it and one how to operate it. Well, I've worked on airplanes for 40 years, and I thought I was kind of mechanically inclined, and I'd be damned if I could figure out how that thing worked. So that year I went to the symposium in Portland, Oregon, and the first session was how to build it. It was very informational. And then John fired that thing up and started making ships, and I said, oh my goodness, I don't know how I'm going to do this, but I'm going to do it. And I did. We drove out there and I thought about it all the way home. And with a lot of help, I made a MDF lathe. And it had some problems, but yet it was a pretty functional lathe. There's a lot of different ways to skin a cat, and that was just one of them. I'll talk a little bit more of that later on. What I want to cover tonight is a little brief history of ornamental turning and some of the different lathes that's out there, past and present, some of the parts of the lathe, and I'm going to do a short demo on how it actually works. Let's show some pictures, Ken. You ready? Whatever, you just show them and I'll talk about them. Okay, this is a picture of my lathe. It is a Lindell White, and it has a steel top, and it has a crossing wheel, and the crossing wheel is this part that has right behind the big round disc. It's got 8 rosettes on it, so you can change from rosette to the next one. Go to the next one, Ken. And you see the overhead drive, which looks an awful lot like this. This here, go back. You had it there. Okay. Go back. That's the other end of my lathe at home. Okay, this here is the MDF lathe that I built for myself. And also at that time frame, we built one for the DAW, and it didn't get used as much as I thought it would. This lathe did a lot of things that the original Lindell White machine wouldn't do, but it had some limitations to it. Okay, the next picture. Okay, go to the next one. We've seen that one. Okay. Oh, okay. Well, it's just the other end of it. Just you can see the overhead drive, and it's the overhead drive is just like this one here. And we'll talk about the overhead drives and all these posts. Yeah, okay. Okay, go to the next one, Ken. Go to the next one. You didn't get the rest? Okay. All right, well, the other one was a picture of a hose apple lathe. The hose apple lathe was originally built back in the late 1800s, early 1900s by this guy named Jacob Hoseapple, and he was a German who went to England to do his craft. And he built over 2,400 different lathes, and none of them was built exactly the same. It's just whatever the person who was buying it, whatever they wanted, that's what he made. But they said that you couldn't take a screw out of one machine and put it in another lathe because every screw was handmade for that installation. But could you imagine what kind of tools they had back in the late 1800s and the 1900s to build something like that? You know, maybe a file. I don't know what kind of tooling they had. it's amazing, you can build about anything you want to with a CNC today, but doing it all by hand was quite a feat. The ornamental turning back in the way back in the 1500s, it actually was in existence, and most of people doing at that time was kings and princes that had almost a slave who was a dedicated turner, and that's all they did was turn to their master's desires. Some of the lathes that was available or has been available was the hose apple, the Evans, the Field, the Plant, a Lauer, and a Clare. And they're all old ones still out there today. But up until just recent, on the last 10 years, the only way you could get into ornamental turning is you had to find one of these old lathes, probably overhaul it, and teach yourself how to operate it, because there was not much activity going on with the ornamental world. Steve White and Dave Lindau. Steve is a aircraft machinist and David is a clockmaker. They have got involved with ornamental turning, and they was at a symposium, and they said, hey, why don't we get together and build a lathe? And they did. And that's where the Lindau machine come from. And it's a very, very useful and very, can do about anything with it. And they have made a lot of gadgets to put onto it to do a lot of different things. David and three other guys have got together and made what they call a made lathe. This stands for their initials. And right now it's going for about $100,000. But it is a piece of art. It's all mahogany and brass, and it's really got some wonderful features to it. It is pretty. You can put that in your living room and be proud to have it there, I think. Another one is a Midel, which is kind of like this lathe, but it's not quite as useful as this lathe. John McGill's MDF lathe, which was done in '07, and he was selling a parts kit, which was the metal pieces. You provide the MDF to make it. But he's no longer making the kit. But all the drawings to make all the metal pieces and the MDF parts are available on the AEW website. So if you're really interested in doing it, you can still find the information. There's a guy named John Armbruster. He is a ophthalmologist, I believe it. He's an eye doctor. He made some Mark 8 lathes. I think he made 24 of them, and they sold for about $36,000, and they are a work of art also. They're very, very nice lathe. They got a lot of mahogany and brass and look very nice. So if you ever hear of a Mark 8 for sale and you're interested, jump on it, because there's not many of them out there. It's a good lathe. I talked about some of the organizations earlier. The OTI, it's a Ornamental Turning International. It's a website. And the SOT in England. And the OTI has a symposium every other year. The next one will be 2020, and they have announced where it's going to be at. But I've been to three of them, and they're very informational. You can talk with the people who makes a living doing this ornamental turning work, and they're freely with their information. They're kind of like all the other wood turners out in the world. They are very free to share their ideas, and I think that's a wonderful thing to be part of a wood turning group, an artist that's willing to share their ideas, because lots of folks in the arts and crafts business, if they tell you, you're going to be as smart as they are, and they don't want to tell you. There's not a lot of books out there. Most everything you're going to find is things that's been written years ago. There is one by Warshaw, which was probably 15, 20 years ago, and it is somewhat understandable. Jacob Hosapple wrote 4 books, and if you have insomnia, that'd be a good book to sit down and read, because in about five pages you're asleep, because it's in the King's English and it's very difficult to read, I thought. In fact, I even looked at the pictures thinking I'll find something to go along with this picture, and I had trouble finding that. So I've read parts through them, but I haven't really read the whole thing. The people I think is probably responsible for the renewed interest in ornamental turning is David Lindau, Steve White, and John McGill. I think they did an awful lot. There's a lot of other people that probably better turners than they are, but they made the machinery, and that's what it's all about. The Lindau machine is still available today. You can buy it in many different varieties, starting at about $4,000 all the way up to close to $20,000. Depends on how deep your pockets are and what you want to do, because there is a multitude of options and accessories you can put onto it. Okay, let's talk about the different parts of the lathe. Any questions to this point? And feel free to ask a question. And I may defer the answer because I'm going to cover it later on, but if I'm not, I will attempt to answer it. I'm not the expert at this. I've just been doing it a while and understand some of it. The headstock. Can you put the camera over here? You can say, okay. This is it's a headstock just about like your wood turning lathe is. It's got the shaft in it, and this has this big disc on it. Some lathes have holes drilled in this disc for an index plate, and I'll talk about indexing a little bit later. The hand crank is here. If you take this motor off, you can engage the hand crank, and you can crank it by hand. And there are some operations you really want to do it by hand, and some you want to use the motor. If you've ever tried to do something on a jointer, or I mean on a router, you know, when you're trying to run a piece through and you want to run it nice and steady, and if you're doing it by hand, you don't realize it, but you're doing it in jerks and splurts. And every time you stop a little bit, you have a possibility of having a little burn mark. And this is kind of the same thing. If you've got something that's powered, it's constant, and it's smooth. So, and you don't have to sit here and crank all day long. This is the slow-speed drive. It is nothing but a barbecue motor, but there's other ones out there. It's quite more complex. You can engage them very easily, and they have a variable speed, so you can make your piece turn slower or faster. And there's times that's very important, because if you got something that's not cutting real well, you slow it down so your cutter can make more passes at it. Okay, the rosettes. This here white thing on the end is a rosette. I've got several in this box here. There are in several different patterns. At home, I have about 40 different patterns. I've used most of them, but not all of them. And they all make a design, but something unique I want to show you in a minute about the rosettes. The touches are the rubbers. This here, can you go down to here? This is a rubber, and it could be a roller like this, or it could be a solid piece. And if it's got a radius to it, can you go to the camera on the end? There you go. Okay, there you can see if you change the radius of the rubber, it changes your design, because it doesn't go all the way into the valley, or it makes a different cut. And there's many different shapes of those. Cutting frames. This here is this is a universal cutting frame. And what makes it universal is you loosen up this set screw right here. Go back to where he's at. Okay. Okay, you loosen this set screw right here, and you can rotate the head anywhere 90 degrees or anywhere in between, so that's what makes it universal. It has two little solid carbide cutters. They're little triangular-shaped cutters. There's a sharp point on all three edges, so if one gets dull, you take that little bitty screw out and hope you don't lose it, and you just rotate it to the next cutting edge, and you're back in business. And there's two of them. They're cutting exactly at the same level. There is another cutter that I have. It has just a solid rod, a solid carbide cutter, and you can cut them into different profiles to cut different profiles. But they're carbide, so it takes diamond to shape them. Okay, the next thing is a tool post. This item right here is a tool post, and it's what's used to connect the cutter to the compound table. The below it is the compound table, and what makes it work nice is it precisionally moves this way and this way, and it's got a little dial on here, and it's graduated in thousandths of an inch. We're not worrying about eighth of an inch or 16th of an inch. We're worrying about thousandths of an inch. A couple of thousandths makes all the difference in the world. What we're really doing is we're taking what a metal machinist would be doing, the precision and accuracy, and relaying it, putting it on wood. So if you don't like to be super precision, this isn't a thing for you. If you like precision work, this might be your calling. Okay, another thing is called a drill frame. This is a drill frame. Where are we at here? On the end here, take this nut off, and you can put different collets in it. I have in here just an 1/8 inch, and it goes up to as high as 3/8 of an inch. It's just a matter of taking it. You know, like your router has a collet. It's the same thing. It grips the shank on all sides, and it's got the tool holder for the tool post, which goes, or the holder for the tool post. Eccentric cutter. This is an eccentric cutter. And what this is used for, well, I didn't bring it. If you're going to do what they call a body corn, where you've got a series of little bitty circles all the way around your piece, this is what you do. You loosen this here screw on the side, and you can move this cutter in and out to a precision diameter of your little circle. They come in a couple of different sizes. A fly cutter. Where is my fly cutter? Well, I got it here somewhere. Well, I'll have to come back to it. I can't seem to find it. It's supposed to be in this pile of stuff somewhere. Overhead drive. This here, what looks like a rubber band, is actually urethane belting. And this here rotozip, which this is an excellent use for a rotozip if you have one, because using it as rotozip, I didn't have a lot of luck with it. But it runs 30,000 RPM. I have over here a router speed control from Harbor Freight that controls the RPMs out. It works very well. The auxiliary rosette holder, to the lathe at home, in this area right here, I have a whole series of discs, and over here at the end, I can just change out one rosette at a time, just like this one here has. And I can also phase this here. I'll show you how that works in a minute. Okay, other things that you can have, other accessories, is a threading jig. You can thread with it with a, not this lathe, but my lathe, Linda White. I can make 4 different thread pitches very accurately, and they come out perfect every time. As a dome chuck, which allows you to do something like this. You see, there's 6 little flowers in a pattern there, and a dome chuck allows you to do something like that. A straight line jig, which allows you to for the cutter to go straight up and down. It's used a lot for guilloche. Guilloche is, you see a lot of old watch faces that had a pretty little zigzag or different design on it. That was done as guilloche. You're using a little carbon tip cutter it's actually just scratching the surface. It's only just a few thousandths deep, but you have to set your machine up very, very accurately, because if you're off just a thousandths, it's going to show. So it takes a long time to set it up, but it's something you can do with it. A curvilinear allows you to make a piece. This one here has an oval shape, if you can see that. You zoom out a little bit. Okay. This is an oval shape. Also, it has a taper to it. I put an oval disc on my machine, and that turned the oval side. Then I have a curvilinear that moved the cutter very carefully to following a profile to get the curved piece in it. It takes a long time to do something like this. And we're all done here. If you want to come up and look at some of the other things that's been done on this machine and other machines, you're certainly welcome to do that. I talked something about phasing. What phasing is all about is, can you zoom in here on this Bascoith? Okay. Okay, I cut one row around this here, and I wanted to move it so that the point is in the valley. That's called phasing. I moved it 50% in relation to the rosette to the wood. And then I cut another row, and then I move it back, and you just go back and forth and do that. Or you can keep going in a spiral pattern and make what they call a chevron. I have done where you just keep step up to the center, and then you step back, and it's kind of a unique pattern. But there is no one thing you can do or can't do. It's just a matter of your imagination, what you can think of it. Or you can see somebody that did something like it, say, hey, maybe I can try that. To me, a lot of people get upset when you copy somebody's work, but I consider it a compliment, because they thought enough of your piece to try to do it. Now, if they try to sell it as their work, I think that's a different story. But just to make one for themselves to see if they can do it, I think it's a compliment to do that. Any questions about the machine? Well, this is considered a rose engine lathe because the rosettes resemble as a rose. A engine lathe, it does not have the rosette. It just moves in straight lines or indexes or what's the reciprocator when you can. It's kind of like a ratchet affair. There's ornamental turning is kind of a broad term. I mean it means you did some ornamentation to your piece, and usually in a situation like this, you did it very precisionally. You didn't hand carve it, but you did it so that the machine actually did your pattern. So it's uniform all the way around. It should not be any difference from one side to the other. That answer the question? Well, the rocking is rose engine. Right. Right. That's what makes it all work is this rocking action. There's a spring over here. Could you see the spring? Okay, when you push it here, it pushes lets it go over, but the spring pushes it back, and that causes the rosette to rub on the rubber, which controls this. Let me turn this on. You see the movement there? Well, the wood is moving the exact same because it's all hooked together, and the cutter is going to be stationary, and it's going to do the cutting. This cutter turns around 8 to 10,000 RPMs. I checked it out at home, and I think I got it set about the same spot. But the speed of the cutter makes a difference on your quality of your cut. You can get it too fast, it'll burn it, and you get it too slow, and you won't have a smooth cut. And again, the speed of the slow speed drive makes a difference on the cut. Also, if you can slow your speed down of your power drive, it can make a smoother cut also. And also, what I try to do is at the very last cut, I'll advance it maybe 0.005 of an inch or less, so that cutter will, if it's fuzzed up, it'll take that away. Okay, sure.
How many of these were actually turned on a regular lathe, then brought to here for ornamentation? Or are all these done completely?
No. They're just about everything is turned on a regular lathe to make it round. Even this here oval box, I went to the lathe and I had a round piece this big around. Then I brought it over here and used the oval rosette to make it oval with. So you got to be able to go back and forth. This machine here does not have a number 2 Morse taper. My machine at home has a number 2 Morse taper, and what that allows me to do is I have an adapter that my chuck screws onto. I put that into my wood turning lathe, turn my piece, and it's round and true, and I bring it over here and put it in the Morse taper, and it's going to be very close to be round and true. There is a gadget called a leveling chuck that you can put between the headstock and the chuck, and it allows you to move the piece this way and slide it left and right. And you use a dial indicator to get that thing so when it goes around, it's perfectly round. It's not going in elliptical motion. Back in my early days when I had my MDF lathe that had a solid shaft, no Morse taper, I was going to make a platter about that big around. Well, I used an 1.8" adapter on my big lathe, and I brought it over to the ornamental lathe, and I started, boy, I'm all ready to go. I was going to do it all around the platter. It's going to be really beautiful. So I started cutting. It cut halfway around, and it quit cutting because the thing was off. The adapter I had was off, and my threads was off, and there were several things. And when you screw this on here, the threads are not as accurate as a Morse taper is going to be. You can get them cocked just a little bit. A machinist, somebody back here today is a machinist, they will take a mallet and they will tap that into being round, if you can picture that. So that you got it, so it's rotating perfectly. But you use a dial indicator so you don't have that dial is deflecting at all. It's perfectly round. But since I've got the Morse taper, I very seldom use my leveling chuck. I just don't need it. Any questions at this point? Okay, I'm going to do a little cut here. I'm going to make this, where you at? Okay. I'm going to make this piece right here. And I'm going to show you a phenomenon. It's kind of hard to understand, but it happens. That ring around the outside is cut with the exact same rosette, with the exact same, it's a different cutter, but it's the same rosette setup. And I'm going to show you how it's done. Oh, these here? Sure. What you'll notice there, I'll explain that now. Oh, come on. I'm going to cut what I call on the left side of center. That's what this cut is right here. Okay, I go over to the right side of center and I get a different cut with the exact same rosette. That's kind of hard to believe, but that does happen. And these are round, and over here they're pointed, and those will show the exact same thing. It just depends on which side of center that you turn it on. Okay, this is going to be a little bit noisy. I'm sorry for that. That's what the lasso here is for. It didn't break. Usually the belt breaks when it does that. Well, what in the heck happened here? Because that's what I got. Oh. Right there. The lasso keeps it from bouncing around when belt comes off like that. It's not supposed to do that, but you've heard of Murphy, haven't you? Do you? I can see it over here. Okay, did you hear that change in the pitch? That means the cut was done on that depth was cut. So I'm going to advance it just a little bit more. One turn of this here moves the table 50 thousandths of an inch. One turn over here moves it 50 thousandths of an inch. You see how it's a little bit fuzzy? I'm going to move it about 3 thousandths, and a lot of that fuzz will go away. Now, if I had some good hardwood, that fuzz wouldn't be there. That's just because it's plywood. But I wanted something where you could stain it so you could see the pattern emerge. Yeah, you can see it out of the other corner there. That's the rubber creating the rocking action. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, I moved it over 300 thousandths. I moved this crank 6 turns. That's what all these are like. These here, I went 300 thousandths to get me another flower. Because it's just growing. Right. The pattern is basically the same. It just grows as the diameter gets bigger. Okay, I'm going to go in just a little bit more. Here's the fly cutter I couldn't find a little bit ago. Where are you at? Okay, that's the fly cutter. I'm going to demonstrate that in just a minute. This is spinning at roughly 8,000 RPMs. This is a little piece of solid carbide that's sharpened, very sharp, and surprisingly in wood they last quite a while. Okay, I got a little ring there, which I didn't plan on, but it gives it another little detail that to add character to it. What else is something that's kind of easy to do is you take a piece of wood that's maybe an eighth of an inch thick and you glue some veneers to it, some different colors of veneers, and then you cut down through them veneers and it makes really a pretty pattern. And it's pretty easy to do. Okay, now we're going to do something altogether different. I'm going to leave the same setup. I'm going to change the cutter. Now this one here, it's very easy to change the direction of the rotation of this here. Just twist the belt. Now it's going to go the other way around. What's in here, for a machinist, this is a #1 starting drill. And the cutter there is about 3/64 of an inch, very, very small. I'm cutting on the right side of center. See, it's making points rather than round. It's almost like magic. Well, I've got a brush here somewhere. That's what we just did. Okay. I'll try not to. Now it's going to take a couple of minutes here, so don't get excited. Yeah, you go ahead and tell jokes if you got them. Smoke them if you got them. Plastic, metal, brass, aluminum. I guess you could turn steel. It's pretty hard on cutters, but if you're using solid carbide cutters, they'll cut the ferrous metals very nicely. Or corian, or any kind of the plastics. I've seen some acrylic boxes where they've turned the inside of it, and you look through it, and it's really got a very pretty flower because it's because of the way it's turned, it gives you that three-dimensional look to it. There's cast and extruded, and one turns better than the other, and I never could remember which was cast turns better than extruded. But for some reason, just the way it's made up.
Have you tried doing, like last month, we had Gary Sanders here with the layered veneer, rosette, or the layered veneer?
Yes, I've done that.
That was a different
Sure, just take you a little thicker piece, a nice base, and glue you a couple different contrasting colors to it. Well, this is sort of like that. This little box right here is actually 3 layers of wood. That was turned. I had to turn the cylinders on a metal lathe so that they fit together perfectly. Because when you start cutting down through, you don't want to see a void. So this was turned on a metal lathe, glued together with epoxy. It looked very ugly until you got it all cleaned up, and then turned the inside. And there was a flower down inside, one at the bottom. Same thing with the top. There's a flower, and this is a piece of blackwood, the little knob, and there's a little fine detail. There you see it. And that was cut with that same cutter in a 24 bump rosette. So the rosettes will do quite a bit of different things. And especially when you throw in different radius of rubbers, it changes your cut. Because the rubber is not going all the way to the bottom of the valley of the rosette.
So the size of the cutter makes a difference.
The rosette, I mean the rubber. The rubber in a rosette, yes, the way they match. When John McGill first made his MDF lathe, it came with 2 rosettes. One was 12 bump, I believe, and the other was kind of a square. And they said if you used all the different combinations you could possibly do, it would take you several years to do them all. It was just that many complications. You can also put a flat rubber on the end here, and it just goes across the bumps, and it's what they call fading, is you're not allowing the rubber to go all the way to the bottom of the rosette. There is a numerous ways of different things that you can do.
So not only there, the shape of this piece here is what you're talking about.
That's right, that's the rubber.
Right, okay.
Keep talking, John. It'll take me a couple of minutes here to. Don't ask me more questions. I'll get confused here. Well, you talk. You talk and answer questions, okay?
Does anybody have any questions? I think we have another expert here. I know. So anybody else have any other questions about rosette? Did you make the rosette?
Both. You can make them yourself. There's people now that actually are loading CAD files onto the internet. We're sharing those around, and those can be run through a CNC machine. There's also ways in which you can borrow assemblies and use a pattern duplicator to create your own. So there's a lot of different ways and different types of rosettes, and you can create your own with your own CAD program. Have that cut out through machine shop, through PDF or a number of other types of cutting materials. We have probably around 200 members in the Dallas Club that do regular turning. There's not many more than that in the U.S. that are doing ornamental turning. So it's definitely an area that a lot of people could explore and learn, but there's not too many people doing it.
Do the rosettes have to be rounded? Can they be oval?
No, there's oval, there's heart shapes.
I see some extra.
There's flower top shapes, like shamrocks and things like that. The other thing you have to keep in mind on the development of one of these is the amplitude that the follower is going to be able to run, as it's going to orbit in a circular manner, but you have to have the touch piece or the rubber be able to go into that. I'll be cutting over here. And come back out as it's rotating around, because you see a great sheet that has things. Okay. The reason I'm wearing my safety glasses is I sharpened one of these here cutters, and I thought I could do it without doing it the way I'm going to do it right now. I just keep spinning it, and it would work like a champ. Well, about the second time this cutter hit the wood, the end of the cutter disappeared, and I have not found it yet. And I was turning probably 10,000 RPM, so it probably went a pretty good long distance in my shop. And I was thinking it could just have been as well lodged in my eye. So I wear safety glasses just because of that. It was one of them things that was a lesson learned. Okay, what I'm going to do is cut a basket pattern, basket weave, okay? Over here, I have a stop that I'm going to use to control my depth. How's that? Is that okay? Okay. I talked earlier about doing having an indexer. I'm using my rosette as an index. My rubber is going fitting into the valley of the rosette very carefully, and I'm going to simply do it like that, make a cut, pack it out, rotate it, make another cut. That's called indexing. And this stop is going to allow me to get into the cuts so they all be the same depth without having to come back and read the little dial here. Okay, I think we're ready. Okay, here we go. I'm going to assume that's about the right depth right there. I'm going to back it out, move it one notch, crank it in.
So why do you not use this on an automated run?
I think it allows the cutter to advance into the wood too fast.
Okay.
And I say when it broke, that got my attention. I just don't. I can.
That's why it broke.
I was going in way too fast.
Okay.
Now I'm sure you can do it the other way, and other people do, but not Dan Henry. Okay. You know, you've heard if you talk to 5 woodworkers, you get 6 answers. Well, that was the 6th answer there. Are you seeing the pattern emerge yet or not? And this is an example here is when it's threaded on there, it's not quite centered. So I got to go just a little bit deeper all the way around to make it work. This wood is okay. When I threaded it onto the shaft, it's not perfectly centered. Threads are your worst enemy. What's that? Oh, you think it'd been more accurate if Fred had made it? Okay, now what I got to do is I got to move this 125 thousandths of an inch this way because this cutter is an 1/8 inch cutter, 1/8 inch to 125 thousandths. Okay. There's 50. There's 125, and I didn't have quite all the slack out of it. Okay, now I want to do a basket weave. So I want my points to be in the middle of the valley. So I got to come over here and change this over here. I'm going to phase it. That's exactly what I'm going to do.
So this is the same thing you do when you're putting a segmenting ring with that ring pattern.
Yeah, exactly the same thing. You're right. Well, usually you go 50%, which that would put the point in the center of the valley. That makes sense? If you can phase less than that. In fact, on my big machine, I've got one that's got 96 little indexes, and they're only maybe 3/16 apart, and so you can get them really closer together. But there is a set of holes in this here for each number of rosette disc you have. You don't want to use a 12 holes for a 24 or vice versa. You want to use these holes as drilled so that the holes are 50% apart. Okay. That makes sense? I went to Phoenix a couple of years ago to a symposium, AAW symposium. In one room there was nothing but going was ornamental turning. Well, David Lindow was going to set up to do a vertical piece with a pin, and he fooled with it probably 25 minutes. If you ever heard the name Gorst de Please, he is a very famous ornamental turner who's dead now, unfortunately. He sat back there in the audience and he finally said, "You know, David, this is exactly the reason most folks don't get into ornamental turning, because it takes too long to set something up." And he was 100% right.
Nothing good. The biggest reason is money.
It does make a little difference. Okay, I moved this 50%. Tell me if my light is okay. Okay, here we go. Dummy. Wrong handle. Well, first of all, it's not going to hold good detail because it's going to fuzz, okay. And more than likely it'll warp and you'll lose your detail or crack. So you really want to use dry, kiln dried wood or stabilized wood. You can take some pretty punky wood and stabilize it, but also I would recommend that you don't take highly figured wood and try to ornament it, because your ornamentation is going to get lost in the grain. Where a lot of folks use black wood is because it has no grain to speak of, and it holds great detail. Pass that around.
And what about like corian and things like that?
Corian works great. Corian and most plastics do quite well. So it's a choice of wood is important also. But using a wet wood just isn't a good idea, because it's going to do things that you're not going to like. Whereas if you use kiln dried wood or something that's pretty dry, then and it's got not a whole lot of grain to it. This is Bradford pear, and Bradford pear is a great turning wood for regular turning, but if you stabilize it, it really is not. What I mean stabilization, when you put it, use cactus juice. Are you familiar with that? Where you soak it in cactus juice, cook it, and then you turn it. And you've actually infused plastic into the pores of the wood, and it makes it very, very stable. But it's got to be very dry to do that. You can't stabilize wet wood. It has to be dry. Okay, this is what I wanted to show right here is the pattern. I didn't get this quite set. I messed up and turned the wrong knob over here. And I didn't have it zeroed, so I lost my place. Now what? Oh. Can you come in from this side? And zoom in on it? There you go. Zoom in on it now. You're zoomed?
And that's the same pattern you had on
Exactly right. That is a basket weave pattern.
Okay.
And you say you can do this so it becomes a chevron color, a pattern, or you can do it, just keep going, and like this piece right here. This was just zigzagged back and forth. The exact same thing as this here is going to turn out. This in here is on an oval box, and I made a jig to go onto the headstock of my lathe and allowed me to do a basket weave on the oval piece. I've always wanted to decorate an oval piece, and this was with my new jig I was able to do this. If you look at it very, very closely and get your micrometer eye out, the pieces of the length of the basket on the side is not quite the same as the basket on the end. But if you don't look that critical, it looks pretty nice. If you hand this to an ornamental turner, say, well, that blah blah blah, it's off here, blah, blah, blah. But if you give to someone who's not an ornamental turner, say, this looks pretty nice there, Daniel. So, and this on the end here, that is a barleycorn. That takes this little tool right here, and you adjust the circle, the size of the cutter to make those. Those are just a series of cutters, series of cuts. There's 24 cuts in there. And it's just the same thing. You use the index here to position. You crank your cutter in, crank it out, move it. Just keep doing it all the way around. And it makes. You sure you didn't do that with a spiral drill? No, I'm pretty sure I didn't. But it's one of them things that really look unique, but it's not that hard to do. Because getting the diameter cut is not that critical. It's just as long as it looks pretty, but in relation to the center and to the outside. Now, when you're doing a barleycorn going around the outside, there is some math involved. So now you want those little bitty circles to just touch all the way around. You do one set all the way around, then you come back and you phase it 50%. So now your circles are still touching, but they're overlapped. That makes sense? And it creates a very pretty pattern. But you got to do some math to do it. You got to figure out what the diameter of this little circle is. Okay, I want to do 24 circles. Okay, my piece is X amount of diameter. Okay, you divide the diameter by your number of pieces, and then that is your diameter of your little piece, and then you got to set your cutter using these little dots, and there's a different cutter set for that. So once you get all done, you go over and you do just a really, really light cut. Say, yeah, I like that, and you go ahead and finish it. If you don't like it, you go back to the lathe and you turn that off.
So how long does it take you to do the triple layer box? How long does it take
Probably 2 weeks.
Okay. Is that like an hour a day, a couple hours a day?
It's
3 hours you set up?
this was done on a mini machinist lathe. I put it on there, and I had to make 3 cylinders. The inside actually was a solid piece. When I glued it up, then I come back and turned the center out of it. But you had to make 3 cylinders so that they would just slide inside of each other. Just where you could slide it together. You didn't want it too tight. You didn't want it too loose. You wanted it so you could still have some glue in there. It's some epoxy glue in there. And that took a while to do that. But to cut the outside, that was pretty simple. I used the rosette cutter or the universal frame cutter and just cut down through it until I got to the depth I wanted. That was pretty easy. And there's a flower, and down inside there's a flower. You can't always see it without the light here. I'll get it here. Anyway, there's a flower down in there. But the reason I could do that is because the bottom was set separately, and it was just set in place and glued. The same thing with the top. It was done separately too. But that was a fun project to do it, to be able to do it. I don't like to do 100 of anything. I like to do a couple of something different. And that's just the challenge of trying to do it. May not ever do anything with it, but at least you know you did it. This little triangular-shaped finial. Now that took a special disc, and I didn't have the disc, so I thought, well, I can make one of them. It took me 8 tries to get one I really liked. I tried to mark it, and I couldn't get it close enough. And I finally just figured out if I use a scribe with a compass, scratched it, and I roughly cut it out with a bandsaw, and I went to my 1-inch belt sander with a fine belt, and I sanded till I got it pretty darn round. It's off maybe a skosh here and there, but not much. But she set this up with that universal frame cutter with that triangular shaped rosette on there, and a cutter will go all the way to the bottom and come back out and go all the way to the bottom and come out. And you advance it maybe 5 or 10 thousandths at a time. So you're making numerous cuts to get this in that shape. And you can do, if you're really clever, you can make this into a spiral. I've seen some of them. You have to do a phasing in between each cut. Now, if you have the index wheel, it has what they call a worm on it, and you can turn a crank, and it'll move it 3 degrees. So you can phase it very little. Simple, very easy to do. Until you go, if you get which way you're turning it. Where's that there little black disc? Okay. That right there, in between each cut, you have to change your cutting setup 3 times. Three different setups for each cut. And if you forget which way you're going, you have a oops. So I finally took mine and I took a blue tape and I put a Sharpie on it, turn it this way, because I had that brain freeze, or brain fart, however you want to say it. And I went the wrong way and it screwed it up. But you get to doing these things and you get into a trance, or you're not thinking as clearly as you should be, and you really have to think pretty clearly most of the time. And I know lots of times that I'm thinking, boy, I know exactly how I'm going to do this, and you start doing it. I said, well, damn, that ain't going to work. So the best thing to do is shut the machine off, go someplace else, stop and think about it a while, and maybe a solution will come to you, and maybe you call Jeff and said, hey, Jeff, how in the world do I do this? But it's very nice to have somebody to talk to. When I started this, there was me, myself, and I, and that was it as far as ornamental turners. And slowly there's been a group formed. We've got 8 in a group right now that are all there's 4 of the Lindau machines and 4 other ones. And it's good to be able to sit down and talk once in a while and just discuss what we've done, what we'd like to do, and where we're going, and what's going on. And that's why we did this workshop back in May, and that really turned out quite well, because we had David Lindau and a guy named Peter Gertzel. He came from Washington State, and Peter's very good at this. And he has a made lathe, so I don't think money's a problem with him. But anyhow, between the two of them, we had a great time because they showed us a lot of different things to do, and it was just a fun weekend. Is there any questions? Hopefully I just wet your whistle. There is a whole lot more to this. If you're interested in getting more information, please call. Don't do it during next week because I won't be able to answer the phone. I won't be around. But the first couple of weeks.
I just want to put a plug in again. There's like 8 of us, in the North Texas area that do this. I think we're going to get together sometime in September. And they really are helpful because you forget parts of this. It's really detailed, but it's really fascinating too. So we get together and talk about different tools, different things. It's helpful. So if you find this interesting, reach out to Dan or Jeff or myself or Tom. Anyway, at least the 3 of us, we can help guide you along.
More than enough context.
Yeah, and we're not trying to, and we're not going to try to play I got a secret. They're open and answer questions, and the goal is to try to get more people interested. It's not an inexpensive thing to do, but it's amazing some of the things that you can do with it. Any other questions or comments? Or I hope I didn't confuse you with too many details and facts, but it's all part of it. So, the more you... Oh, that's a trade secret. Right, she might see this. So. And I have made some of my stuff, and some of them I haven't. I kind of find it kind of fun to come up with an idea and pursue it and make something. It's just like these indexing plates down there. I did that, but I drilled the holes using the indexing portions of my Lindau white machine. So I had something to help me get started. Somebody said something about making rosettes, And I don't, you can do that, but to get them very precision, you almost have to have a CNC machine. Mark Duvall made this here rosette for me, and we worked at it quite a while before it spit the machine, before it spit it out. And Mark worked on it a long time. You have to know how to run the machine and to make it really work well. This here is African blackwood, and it's really a great wood to turn. And this is a shell pattern using a another gadget that goes on the lathe. And there are several cuts there, and each cut, if you don't get it set right, it's not going to come out right.
You say that's African blackwood?
That's African blackwood.
Have you tried like ebony or the other dense woods, cocobolo, not cocobolo?
Well, too much pattern to it. You really want something that doesn't have a lot of pattern, not a grain to it. Plain, yes. Dense hardwood, yes. Yeah, definitely. And you can take some woods that's kind of punky and stabilize them, and or you just put a layer of thin super glue over a lot of spunky wood will stabilize it a lot. Thin super glue works, especially when I cut threads. I can cut threads in some pretty soft wood, and when I get it shaped the way I want, ready for the threads, I'll run me a drizzle of super glue all the way around it, let it cure good, cut my threads, and before I change anything, I go back and run another layer of super glue in it, let it dry, and then run my cutter across it one more time, and it makes a pretty good thread, surprisingly, in some pretty punky wood. Super glue goes a long way. But you want to let it dry before you stick it together because you may never get it apart. And I did some threading just years ago with some olive wood. Boy, the olive wood smells so good, feels so good when it's turning. That stuff warps so bad. I made some box out of it. The next day, I couldn't hardly get the lid off. It had warped that much just overnight. It was amazing. Pretty, but it smelled good. Any questions? Thank you.
Thank you very much.